The night was cold, and the sky above Earth was a deep, empty black. A small, abandoned alleyway in the middle of a ruined city was the last place the alien woman ever expected to be. She had once been a proud warrior, a soldier of her people, feared by many across the galaxy. But now she was on the brink of death, a wounded stranger on an unfamiliar world. Her name was Zora, and she was from a distant planet far away from Earth, one that had been locked in a long, bitter war with humans. For years, her people had fought fiercely against the humans, who had invaded their territory. Zora had been a scout, a soldier, and a spy in the war. She had seen the horrors of battle, the destruction, and the lives lost. But none of that prepared her for the hopelessness she felt now. Zora was alone. She had been separated from her team during an attack, and now she was a lone survivor, hiding from the very species she had once called enemies. Her wounds were deep, and the blood stained the ground beneath her, mixing with the dirt and grime of the city's streets. She could feel her strength slipping away, her body growing weaker with each passing minute. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and her vision blurred. She knew she had no chance of surviving. The human soldiers were closing in on her. She could hear their footsteps echoing through the alley, their heavy boots hitting the ground with each step. Zora could feel the fear rising within her, but there was nothing she could do to fight it anymore. She had fought enough battles. She had fought for her people, for survival, but now, all she wanted was peace, something she had never known. As the soldiers grew closer, Zora's heart sank. She could hear their voices now, harsh and commanding. They were talking among themselves, debating how to deal with the alien who had infiltrated their city. But to Zora, their words were meaningless. They were all the same, another enemy, another force coming to finish what had been started long ago. She had no way of stopping them. Her hand reached down, trembling, and she pulled out a small weapon from her belt. It was the last weapon she had left, a small, sleek pistol. But Zora knew it was useless, even if she managed to fire it. There was no way she could take down an entire group of soldiers. She was too weak. Her fingers trembled as she held it, unsure whether she should even bother. And then she heard something unexpected. A voice. "Step away from her." Zora froze. The voice was calm, steady, and undeniably human. It wasn't like the harsh shouts of the soldiers or the threatening growls she had heard throughout the war. This voice was different. It sounded almost protective. She turned her head, just enough to see who had spoken. A man stood in front of her, facing the soldiers, blocking her from their view. He wasn't wearing the heavy armor of the soldiers. Instead, he wore simple clothing, a black jacket, and trousers. His eyes locked with hers, and for a moment, Zora could see something she hadn't expected. A deep, unwavering determination. The soldiers hesitated. They were confused, unsure of what to do. The man, this human, stood there, completely calm, as if he had all the time in the world to make his decision. The leader of the group stepped forward, his hand resting on the rifle at his side. "Who are you?" the soldier demanded. "This alien is a threat. Step aside, civilian, or we'll deal with you too." The man didn't move. Instead, he looked the soldier straight in the eye, his face hardening with resolve. "I'm not going to let you kill her," he said simply. "She's not your enemy." Zora's eyes widened in disbelief. What was this human saying? Didn't he know who she was? Didn't he know what she had done in the war? She had killed countless humans, taken part in battles that had claimed the lives of thousands. Why would he want to protect her? She was nothing but a monster to him, just like all the other aliens who had invaded Earth. But there was something in his eyes, something she couldn't quite understand. Compassion. No, that couldn't be right. She was nothing to him. She was just an alien, a thing to be feared and destroyed. The soldiers around the man looked at each other, unsure of what to do. Some were nervous, some confused, and some even angry. But the leader seemed to be the only one with the courage to speak. "Are you crazy?" he shouted. "She's an alien. She doesn't belong here. She's been killing us for years." The man didn't flinch. He didn't show any sign of fear. He just stood there, unwavering. "I don't care what she's done," he said quietly. "I'm not going to let you kill her. She deserves a chance." Zora felt a strange knot form in her stomach. She was ready to die. She had come to terms with it. She had accepted the fact that her life was over, that she had failed. But this human, he was offering her something she hadn't expected. Protection. A chance at survival. A chance at redemption. "Why are you doing this?" Zora managed to whisper, her voice hoarse. The man looked down at her, his eyes softening. "Because no one deserves to die like this. Not even you." Zora felt her heart race, a mix of confusion and hope swirling inside her. Why was he doing this? She didn't understand, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a small spark of something other than fear. Could it be hope? Could it be trust? Before she could say anything more, the human soldier took a step forward, blocking her view of the soldiers. The tension in the air was thick, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. The soldiers stood frozen, unsure of what to do. And in that moment, Zora realized one thing. She was no longer alone. The question lingered in her mind, and the answer was still unclear. Could this human really be trusted? Could he be her protector, her savior? And with that thought, Zora's fate rested in the hands of a human she had once feared. Zora's breathing was still shallow, her body trembling from both the pain and the shock of the moment. She was confused, struggling to make sense of what had just happened. A human, a soldier of the very race she had been trained to fight, had stepped forward and shielded her. He had given her a chance, something she never thought she'd have on Earth. For a long moment, neither she nor the soldiers moved. The tension in the air was unbearable. The leader of the group, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, stared at the soldier who had intervened. The rest of the squad looked at each other, unsure whether to follow their leader's orders or to question the strange action they were witnessing. Zora's head felt heavy as she tried to lift herself slightly, her strength failing her. She could barely keep her eyes open, and her body felt like it was made of stone. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the words wouldn't come. Her mind was clouded, and her body was betraying her. The man who had protected her didn't seem to notice the looming danger. Instead, he turned to Zora, his eyes filled with something unfamiliar, concern perhaps. He crouched beside her carefully, his gaze softening as he took in the blood staining her body and the pain etched on her face. "You're not in this alone," he said quietly, as though speaking to a wounded animal, not a feared enemy. His voice was steady, warm, and gentle, so different from the harsh tones she had heard all her life. Zora looked up at him, her vision blurry but still focused enough to see the kindness in his eyes. She had never seen anything like it. Her people had always viewed humans as heartless, driven only by survival and power. Her people had fought them for years, each side seeing the other as the enemy. And yet here was a human offering her help, offering her a chance to live. "Why are you doing this?" Zora finally managed to rasp, the words barely escaping her lips. Her voice was cracked, weak, like a broken thing. "Why protect me? I'm an enemy to your kind." The human man paused, his brow furrowing slightly. He didn't seem angry, nor did he show any fear. He simply looked at her as if trying to understand. "I don't see an enemy in you," he said slowly, his voice soft, as if searching for the right words. "I see someone who's been caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, a person who's been through enough already." Zora's mind was racing. She couldn't understand him. All her life, she had been told that humans were the enemy, that they were ruthless and merciless. She had been trained to think of them as nothing but targets. And yet here was this man, one of the very humans she had fought against, offering his help, his protection. What was his true motive? Was this some kind of trap? But even as she questioned him, something deep inside her shifted. She felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest, something like hope, but tinged with doubt. She had long since given up on believing in anything good. Trust, friendship, and mercy seemed like distant concepts, far removed from the harsh reality she had lived in. "Don't you hate me?" Zora asked, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "Don't you fear what I am?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced back at the soldiers who still stood at the entrance to the alley, clearly unsure of what to do. The leader of the group had been shouting, trying to rally the troops, but no one moved. They seemed paralyzed by the man's sudden defiance. "No," the soldier finally replied, his gaze turning back to Zora. "I don't hate you. I've seen enough war to know that we're all just people caught in a cycle we can't escape. You're just as much a victim of this war as I am." Zora was stunned. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had called her a victim. She was the one who had invaded human worlds, the one who had fought in battles. She was supposed to be the aggressor, the one with no mercy. And yet this human soldier, who had every reason to hate her, saw something different. Before she could respond, the man stood up slowly, his movements cautious but determined. He turned his back on her and faced the soldiers once more, his shoulders squared with the weight of the decision he had made. The leader of the human soldiers was now visibly angry. "You're making a mistake." The soldier spat. "You're siding with the enemy. Do you really think she'll spare you? She'll kill you as soon as she gets the chance." The human soldier didn't flinch. He simply stood tall, his posture unwavering. "I'm not siding with anyone," he said firmly. "I'm siding with what's right. And right now, what's right is protecting her." The soldiers seemed confused, uncertain of how to proceed. They had been trained to eliminate the alien threat, not to show mercy. But here was one of their own, defying their orders, choosing to protect the very being they had been told to destroy. Zora watched, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't decide if she should feel grateful or suspicious. The man's words had meant something. She felt a flicker of hope, but she had been betrayed before. She had seen allies turn into enemies in an instant. But this time felt different. The way the man stood up to his own people, the way he spoke, it felt genuine. She couldn't explain it, but she sensed it. Finally, after a long, tense silence, the human soldier spoke again. "Get out of here. Go. Now." The soldiers hesitated. They looked at their leader, waiting for instructions. The leader's face was red with anger, but he didn't seem willing to escalate things any further. One by one, they slowly turned and walked away, muttering angrily under their breath. Zora felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. She had been certain that her life would end there, at the hands of the humans she had feared. But somehow, the human soldier had changed the course of her fate. As the last of the soldiers disappeared from sight, Zora struggled to sit up, her vision blurry but her mind clearer than ever before. She looked up at the soldier, still standing strong in front of her, his face set with determination. "Why?" she asked again, her voice softer this time. "Why did you do this?" The man finally turned to face her, his eyes meeting hers once more. "Because I believe in second chances," he said simply. "And maybe, just maybe, we can find a way to stop this war before it destroys us all." Zora didn't know what to say. She only knew one thing. Her life had just been saved by a human. And for the first time in a long time, she felt a small spark of hope ignite within her. The moonlight filtered through the broken buildings, casting long shadows over the alley. Zora was leaning against the cold stone wall, still struggling to stay conscious. Her wounds, though temporarily slowed by the human soldier's protection, were deep. The blood had slowed to a trickle, but the pain didn't fade. The man who had saved her stood in front of her now, his posture tense. Despite his earlier calmness, his eyes were now scanning the alley, always vigilant, always watching for danger. The soldiers might have left, but they could return at any moment. And even if they didn't, there was the matter of Zora herself. She was, after all, an alien. the very thing that humans had been taught to fear, to hate. Zora wanted to speak, to thank him, but the words felt like they were caught in her throat. There was so much to say, so many questions swirling in her mind. Why had he saved her? Why had he chosen to protect an enemy? The humans had been taught to see her kind as nothing more than monsters, invaders, a threat to everything they held dear. But this human had shown her mercy. Why? Her heart still raced as she watched the soldier, trying to piece together any clue that could explain his actions. His eyes were focused, scanning the dark corners of the alley, but she could tell he wasn't just keeping watch for enemies. He was thinking, calculating something, about her, about their situation. "Why are you doing this?" Zora finally asked again, her voice weaker this time. She needed answers, needed to understand. But the question still felt like a riddle with no solution. Why protect me? After everything my people have done to yours. The human didn't look at her immediately. He remained still, hands resting lightly at his sides, the rifle strapped across his back. His silence stretched for several long moments, and Zora thought perhaps he wasn't going to answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but steady. "I'm not protecting you because of who you are," he said, finally turning to face her, his eyes meeting hers with something resembling sympathy. "I'm protecting you because of who I am." Zora frowned. Who you are? She didn't understand. What could his personal identity have to do with her life? Was he so desperate for redemption that he was willing to risk everything for a stranger, an enemy? The soldier took a deep breath, stepping closer to her, but still keeping a safe distance. His face was somber, but there was a strange warmth in his eyes. "I was a soldier like the ones you'd fought. I fought in the war, on the front lines. I saw what it did to both sides. The bloodshed, the deaths. I lost friends. I lost family." Zora's gaze softened, and for the first time, she saw the pain in his eyes. The same pain she had carried within her for so long. Her people had been at war with the humans for so long that they had forgotten what it was like to grieve, to mourn loss. All she knew was survival, fighting, winning. "I understand loss," Zora said quietly, her voice hoarse. Her hand moved to her side, where the wound still burned, though her mind was momentarily distracted by the soldier's words. "I lost everything too. My people, my planet, my family." The soldier looked at her with a mixture of understanding and sadness. "Then you understand why I'm doing this. I've seen enough pain. I've seen enough suffering. I don't want to add to it. Not anymore." Zora blinked, surprised by his words. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had spoken of ending the war. To her, it had always been about victory, about winning, about pushing forward at any cost. But here was a human, standing before her, offering peace instead of war. It was something she hadn't even considered. "But why me?" Zora whispered, still confused. "You could have left me to die. You could have let your soldiers kill me. No one would have blamed you." The soldier shook his head slowly. "That's not how it works. At least, it shouldn't be." He paused, his face becoming serious, almost pained. "You're not just an alien, Zora. You're a person, and I couldn't just watch you die, no matter what side you're on. It's not about who we are, or where we come from. It's about what we do next, what we choose to be." His words hit Zora harder than she expected. She had lived her whole life in the shadow of violence, a creature born for war, raised to hate and destroy. But this human, this soldier, was showing her something she had never seen before: kindness, even in the face of danger. And as much as she wanted to distrust him, part of her felt an unfamiliar connection to him, something stronger than fear. She looked away from him, the weight of his words heavy on her mind. "And what do you expect from me? I'm an enemy. I've killed your people. I've taken part in a war that's cost thousands of lives. What makes you think I won't kill you too?" The soldier's eyes softened, and he took a small step closer. "I'm not asking you to change overnight. I know it's not that simple, but I believe you can make a choice. We all can, and I'm not going to force you to do anything. But if you're willing to listen, maybe we can find a way to end this war together." Zora's heart pounded in her chest. His words were both hopeful and terrifying. She had never been given a choice before. She had always been told what to do, what to think, what to fight for. But now, this human was offering her something that seemed almost impossible: a chance to change, to leave the past behind, and forge a new path. The alley was silent now, the sounds of the city distant in the night air. For a moment, Zora let herself imagine a life outside of war, a life where she wasn't defined by the bloodshed of her people. But the thought terrified her. She had been a warrior for so long. Could she truly leave that life behind? "I don't know how to trust you," Zora finally said, her voice shaky. "I don't know how to stop being what I was." The soldier smiled, a small, almost sad smile. "Neither do I. But we can figure it out together." Zora looked at him, searching his face for any sign of deception, but all she found was sincerity. For the first time in her life, she felt something shift inside her, a crack in the walls she had built around her heart. Could she trust this man? Could she trust herself? For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The tension between them was thick, but it was a different kind of tension now. It wasn't filled with hatred or fear. It was filled with the uncertainty of two people standing on the edge of something unknown. And then, in the stillness of the night, Zora made a choice. She looked up at the soldier and nodded, just slightly, as if accepting the possibility of something new, something different. Maybe it was foolish, maybe it was dangerous. But in that moment, it was all she could do. "I'll listen," she said quietly. "I'll try." And for the first time in a long time, the future seemed uncertain, but also possible. The night stretched on as an eerie silence fell over the alleyway. Zora leaned against the crumbling wall, trying to keep herself upright, her injuries still pulsing with pain, but there was something different now. A fragile thread of trust had been woven between her and the human soldier, and it was something she hadn't expected. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to close her eyes, not in preparation for battle, but in a moment of peace, however brief it might be. The soldier, he still didn't give her his name, kept his watchful stance, always vigilant. Every now and then, his eyes flicked to her, but he didn't speak. There was a quiet understanding between them. He had chosen to protect her. But why? Zora couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story, something hidden beneath his calm exterior. She needed to know why, needed to understand what drove him to make such a risky choice. A faint sound broke the silence, a shift in the wind, the distant footsteps of someone moving in the shadows. Zora's senses, despite her injuries, kicked into gear. She tensed, ready for anything. An attack, another squad of soldiers, even a trap. She instinctively reached for the small weapon at her side. But the human soldier raised a hand to stop her. "It's not them," he said softly, his voice steady as ever. Zora hesitated. Her instincts screamed at her to remain on alert. Every fiber of her being was telling her that no human could be trusted, especially not one who had just risked his life for her. But there was something about his calmness that kept her from acting. "You said you were a soldier," Zora whispered, her voice heavy with suspicion. "But why did you leave? Why protect me now?" The soldier's gaze met hers, and for a moment, he didn't say anything. He turned away, his face hardening as if considering how much to reveal. His hand rested on the hilt of the small knife sheathed on his belt. He was calm, but Zora could see the hint of tension in his posture. "I didn't leave," he said at last, his voice flat. "I was reassigned, and I wasn't just a soldier. I was a part of something much larger." Zora frowned, her heart racing. "What do you mean?" She pressed, her mind working fast, trying to make sense of the situation. The soldier's eyes narrowed, and he glanced around them again, ensuring the alley remained empty. You're not the only one with secrets. I'm not just some soldier on the run," he said, his tone suddenly sharper. "I've seen things you wouldn't believe. I was part of a special unit, a division of the military that dealt with covert operations." Zora's mind reeled. Covert operations. What was he talking about? Her war had been a battle for survival, a struggle that had consumed her every waking moment. But she knew enough to understand that not everything was as it seemed on either side of the conflict. Perhaps this human soldier's past wasn't as straightforward as he had made it appear. He noticed her confusion and continued, his voice softer now. "I was assigned to gather intelligence about your people, Zora. Your race. Our superiors wanted to learn everything they could about you, about the strength of your forces. I was one of the ones tasked with infiltrating your defenses, learning your tactics. I've seen how your people fight. I've seen the horrors on both sides of this war." Zora's eyes widened. So this man, this human, had been sent to study her people, perhaps even to destroy them. A spy. He had been one of those responsible for the war, for everything she had fought for. "You are just like me then," Zora said bitterly, "a weapon in the hands of your leaders, using my people as nothing more than subjects for your operations." The soldier's face tightened at her words, but there was no anger, only a deep regret. He was silent for a long time, allowing the weight of her words to hang in the air between them. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "I didn't choose it. None of us did. We were just following orders. But somewhere along the way, I started to see the bigger picture. The more I learned, the more I realized we were all being used." His eyes locked with hers, as if trying to convey the sincerity of his words. "I didn't want to be a part of the destruction. I couldn't keep doing it." Zora felt a strange, painful understanding. She had always seen the humans as the enemy, the invaders. But this soldier, who had been sent to gather intelligence on her people, was now standing before her, offering not war, but peace. The irony hit her hard. He had once been a part of the system she had fought against, and now he was offering her a chance for survival, a chance to escape the cycle of violence. "You expect me to believe you," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and confusion. "You expect me to trust you after everything you've done, everything your people have done to mine." The soldier didn't flinch. "I know it's hard to believe, but it's the truth. I didn't know it back then, but now I do. All the lives lost, all the destruction, it wasn't worth it. And now I see the cost of it, and I can't be a part of that anymore." Zora stayed silent, her mind racing. The truth of his words cut deeper than she expected. How could she trust someone who had been sent to destroy everything she had fought for? How could she believe in his change of heart? But even as doubt gnawed at her, she couldn't ignore the fact that he had spared her life. He had defied his orders, stepped in when others would have gladly ended her existence. "What's your plan, then?" Zora asked quietly, the suspicion still lingering in her voice. "You want to stop the war. But how? We're enemies. We've been enemies for so long." The soldier stepped closer, his face now full of determination. "I don't have all the answers, but I believe if we can find a way to work together, maybe we can end the bloodshed. Maybe it's not too late to stop this war before it destroys everything." Zora was torn. She had never considered peace, never believed that a resolution could exist between her people and the humans. Her mind and body were built for battle, for survival. But here was a human, a former enemy, offering her an opportunity, a chance to change the course of the war. Could it be possible? Could they really find a way to stop the cycle of violence? The weight of his words lingered in the air as they both stood in the alley, caught in the quiet tension between them. Zora's gaze softened for a moment, just enough for the smallest flicker of hope to emerge. She was still unsure, still filled with doubt, but she knew one thing. She couldn't go back to the life she had known. She couldn't keep fighting this endless war. "Then we'll try," she said, her voice firm but uncertain. "But know this, I don't forgive easily. And I don't trust easily either. But I'll listen to your plan, and we'll see if it's enough." The soldier nodded, understanding her hesitation. He didn't ask for her trust. He knew it was something he had to earn. "That's all I'm asking for. A chance to try." As the night stretched on, the city around them quiet and abandoned, the two former enemies stood together in the shadows, both knowing that their futures, and the future of their worlds, were hanging in the balance. And somewhere deep inside, Zora felt that fragile thread of hope tighten just a little. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this endless war. The sound of a distant gunshot broke the quiet, echoing through the alley with a sharp crack. Zora's instincts kicked in instantly. Her hand reached for the weapon at her side, but before she could draw it, the human soldier's hand shot out to stop her. "Stay down," he whispered urgently, his eyes scanning the darkened streets. Zora's heart pounded in her chest, but she obeyed. She lowered herself as the soldier moved swiftly, crouching low, his every movement sharp and controlled. His eyes darted around, focused on the rooftops above them, the shadows where enemies might be lurking. "Who was that?" Zora whispered, her voice tight with both fear and confusion. The gunshot had come from somewhere high up, perhaps from one of the nearby buildings. Was it a warning, or was someone targeting them? The soldier didn't respond right away. His hand moved to the small radio on his belt, turning it on quietly. He listened for a few seconds before muttering, "It's them. They've tracked us." Zora's eyes widened. Them? Who was he talking about? He looked at her quickly, his voice low and urgent. "It's the division I used to belong to. They're not happy with me being here. They want you dead. They don't care if I'm protecting you." Zora's blood ran cold. She had been expecting this. This war was never going to be as simple as walking away from it. But hearing that those who had once fought alongside this soldier were now after them both, it wasn't just a danger anymore. It was a hunt. The soldier grabbed her arm gently but firmly, pulling her into the shadows of a nearby doorway. "We need to move now." Before Zora could react, a second shot rang out, hitting the wall near them with a loud crack. She flinched, instinctively ducking down, her heart pounding in her chest. "Stay close to me," the soldier ordered, his voice no longer just calm, but commanding. The tension in the air was palpable, and she could feel the danger closing in on them. Zora's mind raced. The soldier had been a part of their division, his former team, now a threat. Was he really betraying them, or was he trying to stop them from completing their mission? The questions flooded her thoughts, but she pushed them away. Now wasn't the time for doubt. Survival was the only thing that mattered. The soldier looked over his shoulder, making eye contact with her for a brief moment. "Follow me," he said, his eyes steely. "And trust me, just this time." Zora didn't answer. She couldn't afford to hesitate. The shot had confirmed it. There was no turning back now. The soldier led her through the maze of narrow alleyways, moving quickly and quietly. Every step felt like an eternity, each corner they turned making the risk higher. Zora's mind flashed back to the soldiers chasing her before. She couldn't let them catch up again. If they did, she was as good as dead. They reached a narrow street where the soldier paused, his hand gently pushing Zora against a wall. He peered around the corner before pulling her further down the alley, staying close to the shadows. It was like a game of cat and mouse, but the stakes were higher than ever before. "I've got a place," the soldier muttered, pulling out a small map from his jacket. His fingers traced the route quickly. "It's safe. For now." Safe. Zora didn't believe in safety anymore. Not in this war, not with everything she had seen and done. But she followed him without question, her senses still alert for any sign of danger. As they neared the end of the alley, another shot rang out. This time, the bullet skimmed the soldier's shoulder, narrowly missing him. The soldier gritted his teeth but didn't slow down. Zora's hand shot out instinctively to grab his arm, but he shook her off with a forceful motion. "Stay back," he hissed. I'm not going to get you killed. Do you understand? She nodded, feeling her pulse race in her throat. There was no time for hesitation, no time for questions. She had to keep moving. They reached a stairwell, leading them up into the bowels of an old, abandoned building. The soldier led her inside, pulling a large metal door behind them. It creaked as it closed, and Zora could hear the sound of footsteps approaching from below. The soldiers, his own people, were close. They couldn't afford to be caught. He quickly locked the door and turned to face her, his expression tense. The fight wasn't over. The danger was real. But Zora noticed something in his eyes. Determination. This wasn't just a soldier running from his past. This was someone trying to protect her, despite everything. You'll be safe here. For now, the soldier said, panting lightly from the run. Zora stood still, her chest rising and falling in rapid breaths. The shot had thrown everything into chaos. They were both targets now, and their chances of survival had just decreased by 1,000-fold. Who's chasing us? Zora finally asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. Who else is involved in this? The soldier's eyes hardened, but his voice was calm. A lot of people, he said, looking at the door they had just sealed. A lot of people who don't want us alive. Zora clenched her fists, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. A lot of people. This wasn't just about him anymore. It wasn't just about her either. They were caught in something far bigger than either of them. You're not alone in this, the soldier said, as if reading her mind. And we'll get out of this. I'll make sure of it. The words felt hollow to Zora, as if the very promise was as fragile as the air around them. But something in his voice made her believe, just for a moment, that he might be right. A loud crash came from the other side of the door. The soldiers were closing in, and their time was running out. With the sound of boots pounding closer, Zora steeled herself for what was next. Whatever happened now, there was no going back. The pounding on the door grew louder, more urgent. Each thud felt like a countdown, a reminder that time was running out. Zora's breath was shallow, her mind racing. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears as she pressed herself into the corner of the dimly lit room, her eyes never leaving the soldier. The soldier, calm despite the tension, quickly moved to a window, his eyes scanning the street below. His hand moved over the old, dusty frame, carefully lifting the sash to peek outside. Zora could see the tension in his face, the same look that had been there when he had saved her life, but this time it was colder, more desperate. "We don't have much time," he said quietly, his voice steady but urgent. "We need to move. They're getting closer." Zora nodded, her thoughts racing. They had no choice now. Running was their only option, but she didn't know where they could go. She had no allies, no backup. Her entire world had been flipped upside down. She glanced at the soldier, wondering if he truly knew what he was doing, or if he was just as lost as she was. But then, in his eyes, she saw something that made her trust him, even if only for a moment. Determination. "What's the plan?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The soldier didn't respond immediately. His gaze flicked between the window and the door, calculating. The footsteps outside were growing louder, closer. Whoever was after them wasn't going to wait much longer. "We'll go through the back," he said finally. "There's an old tunnel system in this building. It'll lead us underground. We can find an exit farther down. It's our best shot." Zora's pulse quickened. A tunnel system. She hadn't known about anything like that, but she didn't question him. They had no time to waste. The pounding on the door was now a constant thrum in the back of her mind, urging her to act. The soldier moved quickly, grabbing a small metal panel near the floor and pulling it aside. Beneath it, a rusted metal ladder led down into the darkness below. Zora hesitated for only a moment before following him. The soldier gave her a brief look as she descended first, then followed behind her, closing the trapdoor silently. The tunnel was damp and smelled of mildew and age. The walls were rough, and the air was thick with dust. Zora's footsteps echoed softly against the stone, but the soldier was quicker, always a few steps ahead, guiding her through the labyrinth of underground passages. For a moment, they moved in silence, the tension thick between them. Zora's mind was racing, trying to process everything. She had trusted him once, and now, as they ventured deeper into the unknown, she found herself asking once again if she had made the right choice. Could she truly trust him, or was this just another trap? She didn't know, but the fear in her chest kept her moving forward. "We're not out of the woods yet," the soldier said, breaking the silence as he looked over his shoulder. "They'll be searching for us, and they know these tunnels too. But if we keep moving, we might have a chance to escape." Zora's hand brushed against the rough stone wall, her mind focused on their immediate survival. It was strange, but she was beginning to see this soldier not as an enemy, but as someone fighting for his own survival just as much as she was. "How many of them are there?" Zora asked quietly, her voice barely audible in the narrow space. The soldier paused, his expression turning hard. "More than I'd like to count. My former team, the ones I betrayed. They'll stop at nothing to finish the job. You're not just a target now, Zora. I am too. And that makes us both marked." Zora's stomach twisted. He had betrayed his own team, the people who had once been his comrades. It wasn't the revelation that shocked her. It was the way he said it. There was no guilt in his tone, just acceptance. "They'll follow us until they're sure we're dead," he continued. "And they'll use everything at their disposal to find us." Zora could feel the weight of his words settle on her shoulders. Everything at their disposal. That meant there were more dangers than just soldiers. There could be drones, tracking devices, even advanced technology that she didn't fully understand. "Do you have a plan?" Zora asked, her voice filled with both curiosity and doubt. The soldier didn't answer right away. He stopped at a fork in the tunnel, looking both ways. He was weighing his options, assessing the risks. "We need to head south," he said, turning to the right. "There's a safe house a few miles from here. If we can make it there, we'll be able to regroup, figure out our next move. But we can't stop. Not until we're out of their reach." Zora didn't argue. She knew better than to waste time with questions. Her mind kept flashing back to the gunshot they had heard earlier. The soldiers were closing in, and every step they took felt like a race against time. She had to keep moving. They both had to keep moving. They hurried through the dark tunnels, the soldier leading the way. Every turn, every creak of the old pipes above them seemed like a warning, a signal that danger was closing in. But they couldn't afford to stop. They had to keep going. The weight of the situation, of what was at stake, pressed on Zora's chest like a heavy stone. She could feel her breath quicken, her heart pounding in her ears. As they reached a narrow section of the tunnel, the soldier stopped again, motioning for her to be quiet. He peered into the distance, his hand resting on the handle of the small pistol tucked into his belt. "They're close," he muttered. "I hear them." Zora's breath caught in her throat. She could hear it now, too. The faint sound of footsteps. But it wasn't just one set of footsteps. It was multiple. A search party. And they were coming right for them. Without a word, the soldier grabbed Zora's arm, pulling her into the shadows. They crouched low, pressing themselves against the wall as the sound of footsteps grew louder. The light from a small flashlight flickered in the distance, illuminating the path ahead. Zora's body tensed, her mind racing. The soldiers were close now, too close. The soldier's hand tightened around his weapon, his eyes narrowing as they waited in the dark. Zora felt her pulse quicken. They had one chance, one moment where they could either escape or be caught. Her eyes locked with his, and she saw the same determination in them that had first drawn her to trust him. They were in this together now. There was no turning back. And then, with a deep breath, the soldier made his move. "Run," he hissed, pushing her forward. They bolted through the tunnels, hearts pounding, knowing that every step could be their last. The hunt was on. The tunnel ahead seemed to stretch forever, the walls closing in on them with every hurried step. Zora's breath came in sharp gasps as she pushed herself forward, her feet stumbling slightly as the weight of their situation bore down on her. The soldier was right behind her, moving with precision, his every step calculated, but his eyes were constantly scanning the darkness ahead. "We're not far now," the soldier said, his voice urgent but steady. "Just keep running. The safe house is just ahead." Zora nodded, barely registering his words. She was too focused on the sounds behind them. Footsteps echoing off the narrow tunnel walls, growing louder. The soldiers chasing them weren't far behind. It was only a matter of time before they caught up. "We have to make it. We have to outrun them." Her mind raced as she thought of the soldier's words earlier. More than I'd like to count. She wasn't just a target anymore. She wasn't alone in this. She couldn't shake the feeling that whatever happened in these next few moments would change everything. But how? Could she really trust this human soldier, who had once been part of the force that wanted to destroy her people? Could she truly escape the war? No, end the war. By running with him. As if reading her mind, the soldier glanced at her, his eyes full of determination. "Don't think about it," he said, his voice softer now. "Not now. We'll have time to talk later. Right now, we just need to survive." Zora wanted to argue, wanted to ask more questions, but she knew there was no time. She had to keep running. Ahead, a faint glow illuminated the end of the tunnel. They were getting closer to the safe house, and Zora could feel a surge of hope, even though it was small. Maybe, just maybe, they could make it. But there was still a problem, getting through the final stretch without getting caught. The sound of footsteps grew louder, a heavy, unmistakable rhythm that sent a cold shiver down her spine. They were closing in. She glanced over her shoulder to see two shadowy figures moving fast, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark, their movements deliberate and relentless. "We're not going to outrun them like this," Zora said through gritted teeth, her hand instinctively reaching for the blaster at her side. The soldier's face hardened, but he didn't slow down. "We don't need to outrun them. We just need to make it to the exit." Zora didn't understand. How could they make it to the exit if they were being chased down by trained soldiers? The tunnel was narrowing, and there was nowhere to hide. But just as the soldiers behind them rounded the corner, a sharp metallic sound echoed through the tunnel. The clank of a metal door opening. The soldier's hand shot out, grabbing Zora's arm and pulling her towards the opening in the wall. A hidden door. They burst through it, stepping out into the open air, but they were not safe yet. The safe house was surrounded by thick trees, and Zora could barely make out the outline of the structure through the darkness. The soldier led her to a side entrance, where they paused, crouching low. "Stay down," he whispered, peering around the corner. "They can't know we're here." But Zora wasn't paying attention to the soldier anymore. She was watching the soldiers in the distance, catching glimpses of their figures emerging from the tunnel. They were searching for her, searching for both of them. Zora felt a sinking sensation in her gut. There was no way they were going to stay hidden for long. The soldier was right about one thing. If they didn't act fast, they would be caught. "Now what?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The soldier's gaze locked with hers, his face set in determination. "Now, we fight back." Zora froze. Fight back? That wasn't part of the plan. She had expected to hide, to wait until the threat passed. But fight? She was injured, exhausted, and unsure if she had the strength left for another battle. The soldier, on the other hand, looked calm. Too calm. His eyes never left the approaching soldiers, scanning their movements with the precision of someone who had seen war before. "We have one chance," he said, pulling a small device from his belt and activating it. A low hum filled the air, and the soldier's face lit up as he adjusted the device's settings. "We're going to need a distraction. When it hits, we move." Zora's heart pounded in her chest. What kind of distraction? The soldier grinned, his eyes gleaming. "The kind that will make them wish they hadn't chased us." Before Zora could ask what he meant, the soldier pressed a button on the device, and a loud explosion rang out in the distance. The ground beneath them rumbled, and the sound of shattering glass echoed from the direction of the enemy soldiers. They turned immediately, disoriented, giving Zora and the soldier a precious few seconds to move. "Now," the soldier shouted. Zora didn't hesitate. She followed him as he darted across the clearing, their footsteps muffled by the explosion's aftermath. The soldiers were distracted, but they wouldn't be for long. The soldier led her to a small structure at the edge of the trees, a hidden bunker, she realized. It was dark, but the soldier didn't waste time. He threw open the door, pushing Zora inside before entering himself. "We can't stay here long," he said, locking the door behind them. "We need to prepare for what comes next." Zora leaned against the cold wall, her chest heaving with exertion. She didn't know how much longer they could keep running, or if they could even make it out alive. The explosion had been effective, but it was a temporary solution at best. She turned to the soldier, her thoughts racing. What now? How do we end this? How do we stop them from chasing us forever? The soldier's face was set in grim determination. "We don't stop. We fight. We make our stand here, together." For the first time, Zora saw the full weight of what he was offering her, his loyalty, his commitment to something bigger than just survival. They were both fighting for something greater now. But Zora knew that with each passing moment, the choice before them became clearer. They had come this far, but it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something deeper, a chance to end the war, to break the cycle that had held them both captive for too long. And now, as they prepared for the battle that would decide their fate, Zora realized something crucial. The final choice wasn't just about surviving the war. It was about deciding what kind of future they were willing to fight for. And in that moment, Zora knew that their survival wasn't just about escaping the enemy. It was about forging a new path together.